Are you ready to take your business to the next level? Every day there are countless books and articles that are published offering the key on how to make your business a success. It's easy to feel overwhelmed trying to keep up and run your business. That's why Deb Creer created the Business Power Hour. Keep up on the latest trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. Let the Business Power Hour do the heavy work for you.
Good morning, good morning. I am Deb Creer, and I am passionate about giving professionals the tools that they need to make themselves and their businesses as successful as possible. And today we're going to be talking more about what's inside of us than the outside business world. That is going to pertain, but we're not talking about how to design websites. We're not going to be talking about, we talked about how to send people cookies a couple of days ago. That was a great one. But all of these various things that pertain to business obviously are very important. But if things aren't going well in our hearts and in our minds, none of those things matter. And so we're going to have a great time today talking with Steve Rodgers. So welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Deb. It's a pleasure to be here. I really appreciate it.
Great. Well, let me tell people a little bit about you. So Steve Rodgers is the author of Amazon #1 best-selling book, Lead to Gold, and the recently launched book, The IGI Principles, and I'm going to correct myself because it's actually the IGI Principles, and creator of Alchemy Advisors coaching and consulting firm. Steve is a former Warren Buffett CEO who experienced a radical spiritual transformation that has evolved into a new mission as a purpose-driven consultant and entrepreneur coach, an in-demand international keynote speaker, and, as we said, a best-selling author. So again, Steve, welcome.
Hey, Deb, it's really a pleasure to be here. I've been looking back on some of your shows that you've done, and you've been at this for a while and doing some good work in the world. So thanks for sharing your gifts.
It's great fun. I get to talk to some of the coolest people in the world.
How did you decide to get in this, by the way, originally? What was your very first show that said, I'm going to do my first podcast?
I was a guest on somebody else's podcast, and I went, ooh, this is fun. I can do this.
And then the rest is history.
And the rest is history.
Wow,
I went to the, it was actually a live, a real radio station. I was in studio to do my interview, and I just kind of went right from there up to the powers that be. And I said, I'd like to do a show on social media. This was, back several years ago when social media really was, being first used as a marketing tool.
Right.
And, and I did. And it was a live program. It was great fun. We were in studio in Denver. And then it has evolved through the years. We're now proudly to be part of C-Suite Network.
Yeah, I saw that.
It's great fun. And, because we pre-record, sorry, folks, I hate to break it to you, we pre-record. But it allows us to have guests from around the world, all sorts of different topics and things. And so it really is a lot of fun to do and very educational. I learn something every single time.
Well, they always say that the teacher learns the most, right?
Mm-hmm.
From
right.
being involved in the students and then bringing up your own gifts and skills.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm excited to be on the show. So
cool.
I'll let you lead me wherever you want to go.
Great. Well, one of the things that I always like to know about is how you got to where you are. And, you worked for Warren Buffett's organization, which, holy schmoly, that's about as the pinnacle for many business people. And then you've kind of had this major transition to now, being very successful. So walk us through kind of how that happened and how you truly have discovered what your passion in life is.
Yeah, thank you. Well, that's a big question. I'll try and give the Reader's Digest version, then we can unpack it as we go along.
Okay.
So the Reader's Digest version is I came from a family of 5 boys. My parents had 5 boys in 7 years. So military family, traveling around the country. I guess that's what you do when you're in the military. You have a lot of kids.
Dad's home.
Yeah. So, but I was a very rebellious teenager, and I moved out of my house when I was 17 years old. My dad was a very strict military guy. This is my house. These are my rules. Do as I say. And I still agree with that philosophy. But at the time, I decided to bolt. So I ended up evolving from there, and eventually I went from the restaurant business into the real estate business. Moved to California, and on the path of being in real estate, I went from sales to leadership, and leadership just kept being where I excelled. And I kept moving through the food chain, as they say. And since I was a guy when I moved out of my house that barely graduated high school, I finished the last year of high school on my own, and I kept trying to go to college, thinking, well, if I'm going to be somebody, I better get a college degree.
You have to have that college.
Got to have that college degree, and I just was not an academically driven, smart guy to get through it. And I just went through like 2 or 3 or 4 years of community college, and I just never could complete it. So getting into the real estate space and getting into sales, it gave me a path. And then being in California to start making money that I was unexpected, like, wow, I never thought I was going to make this kind of a money. And then I really knew that I had a natural leadership ability. But since I had never gotten to the degrees of the degree that I thought college would bring me, I always had a coach. And I started hiring coaches in my late 20s. So for 30 years, I've had a coach every single year for 30 years, even before coaching was popular.
Cool.
And that coaching was to help me get specifically laser beam focus on what I was needing or wanting to learn at that time in my life, whether it was leadership or management, et cetera. So that path got me very into goal setting, mindset, personal development. And I always was on a spiritual quest. My parents were very, very strict Catholic and had this very strong foundation. And I very much look back and appreciate and value that they gave me that foundation. I don't practice in the way they practice now in a spiritual belief, but I highly respect it. And I knew from a very young age that I had a much, much higher belief in a higher power than I understood. And so that started this quest of thirst of learning about spirituality and higher purpose. And I started blending that into my life and my business. And then as I went through corporate America, I was in that for 15 years, and we can unpack this further, but I decided to, because of a brick upside the head moment, leave corporate America, and then started my own path into consulting and coaching. And, that was about 5 years ago. So the path really was a calling. I knew I was always being called to something higher. And every time I got to a certain point, I kept saying, this isn't quite it. This isn't quite it. Even though it was fulfilling and it was successful and it was purposeful, I kept going, this isn't quite it. And I knew that I was being called to something more, but I had to go through all these trials and tribulations along the way to earn my stripes, as they say, to get to where I am now. So that's a small chunk of a Reader's Digest version of a very long path. But so that's kind of how I ended up now doing Alchemy Advisors and helping people in business and life purpose. And I really very much understand how to run profitable businesses. But if, as you said at the beginning of the show, if you're not focused on your inner purpose and your happiness and your joy and being of service and some kind of a higher connection, life can become fairly empty with all of those things.
Right. And you're a little bit younger than I am, I think. But we're still of that mindset, especially with your parents and my parents. My dad was Army. Now he wasn't career Army, but he had that. And my mom was very much that very much type of that person too. And to them, and our generation, we were brought up that you had to have things.
Yes.
The big house, the 2.5 kids. I always wondered, that poor 0.5 kid.
Yeah. Which one got cut in half?
And your paycheck clearly was something that was very important, and
your title.
Right. Oh yeah. Yeah. You had to be, president, founder, whatever. Yes. It couldn't just be that, that you were, the worker bee.
Right.
And it was interesting because that way, and even as a young woman growing up, even though, we were still, when I was younger, still pushed more towards marriage and family, but it was about acquiring things. And so, I was supposed to marry well and, marry somebody who was going to have all of those things. And I remember when we had our 10-year class reunion, several years ago, we had our 10-year class reunion. And one of the people wanted to give away, you always do awards and things like that, right? Who came the furthest, who has the most kids, all those things. And she wanted to do who was the most successful. Oh. And I looked at her and I said, now even, I would have been 28 at that point. And I said, by whose definition?
Yes, that's a great question.
And, and she looked at me, and of course for her, there was one definition only, and it was money. How much did somebody make? Because the person that she said should get it probably was the person who was earning the most. Now, I had a graduating class of 32. So
Oh,
it was,
wow.
yeah, it was pretty easy to figure out a lot of these things. But I told her, I said, no, I said, who's to say that, our classmate, Sue, who had 2 wonderful kids, wasn't the most successful,
Yeah.
or this person who owned the local garage wasn't the most successful, or all these things. And I happen to know that the person that she thought was the most successful was probably one of the most miserable.
Mm.
But yeah, we get these weird definitions caught in our brains from when we're really pretty little.
Yes.
And then that drives us, and that's where then we forget that what's in our heart and in our heads is more important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I got on that same quest as well. And that's my current book talks about that. Iggy comes from, he's passed now, but I'm sure people have heard at some point of a guy named Wayne Dyer. And Wayne Dyer was on PBS. He had all kinds of books. He was originally a psychologist therapist, but he became a spiritual leader and thought leader. He was on Oprah and his own shows and all of that. But he talked a lot about ego. And he said, we all have egos as human beings. We just do. It's part of our DNA. It's part of our makeup. And it's not, unnatural to have it, of course.
That's why when we're a little kid, we're like, mine.
That's right. Mine.
Right?
And it helps form part of our identity. I mean, having your ego is part of your identity. So it's not that shouldn't be part of our DNA. But what happened for me is that as I was on that quest of corporate America, I was about the stuff. I was about the title. I was about, my parents are, been married for 60 plus years and, very well provided for us, but we were not a wealthy family. We didn't come from high means. And,
military,
middle class, military, did as best they could. But I always had this, like, I've got to, like you said, have more. I had to get the car or the status. And I was like, God, how am I going to get that if I barely graduated high school? So as I got on that quest and got into corporate America, the next title, the next position, the next paycheck, the next, what emblem I had on my car, how many square feet I had in my house. It was all very much important, a part of my path. And I'm not saying that didn't serve its purpose, because at the time it did help drive me, and I did help do a lot of good in the world and helped a lot of people along the way. But I clearly, looking back, was much more in my ego than I was in Iggy. So Iggy is the opposite of ego, because what Wayne Dyer talked about a lot was that ego, and I was reading one of his books, and one day it just struck me when this very simple phrase, he said, when you are in your ego, which we will always have, but when you're deeply in it, you are edging God out, or you're edging good out. And I went, wow, that's pretty powerful. That makes sense. If I'm just all about me, how could I be in goodness or of service to a higher power? So I said, well, how am I going to remind myself on a daily basis to stay out of my ego? So I said, well, that would be inviting God in, or inviting good in. So I came up with the IGI, and then said, oh, that looks like, or I'm going to call that Iggy. So I started just for my own mantra, my own affirmation, saying, am I an ego? Am I an Iggy? Am I an ego? So when I would walk into a meeting, when I would go into a conversation, when I was making a decision. But it helped me then start less focus on the stuff. And I started getting much more into servant leadership. I started getting much more into serving others, caring what others thought. How could I make a difference in someone else's life? So it did help me start shifting my course beyond what you were saying about the stuff. And it's not that I don't still have that to this day. I do, but it's
we like our stuff.
We like our stuff. I do. I just like a lot less stuff now. And I like to less attachment. I've learned that the more stuff you have, the more attachment you have, and the more stress normally you have in your life, at least. So I've tried to simplify more and more and more, even though I still like some of my stuff.
Oh yeah. And there are times where we need ego. I mean, we like our stuff, but we've changed our opinions of what that stuff has to be.
Yes.
And everybody has things that are important to them, whether it's, what vacation they can take, if we can ever get on planes again, what car they drive, where they live, all of those various things. And we're not saying that there's anything wrong with that. It's just when that becomes the overriding thing, and it's, okay, my house is 3,000 square feet. I got to have a 4,000 square foot house. So I'm going to work 12 hours a day to do it. And just kind of that continual gerbil wheel of, going and going and going. And then that wheel stops for whatever reason, and we don't know how to function.
Yeah, exactly. Well, what I found with that is then there's a fill in the blank from that. I have to have that 4,000 square foot house, or I have to have that Mercedes car, because when I have that, then I'll be happy.
Right.
Then I'll be more happy. Then I will feel more
Right.
fulfilled. Then I'll
And it
feel worthy.
never
And it
happens.
never happens. It's like what I found along the way of, like you said, I did get the pleasure of meeting Warren Buffett and working for him for, I was at the same company for 15 years and he owned it for 7 of the 15 years I worked there. And I went from being a manager to becoming the CEO of that company. And it was a pretty massive company. We were doing $25 billion a year in sales volume and selling around 36,000 houses a year in Southern California. So it was a pretty big organization, but there was a lot of politics, there was a lot of power, there was a lot of corporate structure, and there was a lot of wealth that I met people along the way. And I acquired some of my own wealth along the way. But I found that people of status and people that were in positions that I longed for or wanted, I started asking really personal and direct questions when I would be in meetings or dinners with them and I started asking questions about when they reached that status of they made their first $1 million, they got the president title, they were a published author. How did it feel?
Right.
How fulfilling was it? How long did it last? And did it feel the way they thought that it would feel? And did they feel it was making an impact still in the world after now it had been accomplished? And it was interesting to find, and I spoke to some very successful people along the way and also achieved some of that status myself, that it was always an answer of it didn't quite feel like I thought it was going to feel. It didn't quite feel exactly as I hoped it would last as long. And then I immediately went to what's next. It was interesting. So what happened is, even though wealth can be used for good in the world and wealth can be used to help better your family and wealth can be used to help better your own life, if wealth is only being used as a measuring stick for more status or more power or more control, then I find that becomes a very obvious spotlight on the hole in the soul. And we all have holes in the soul. We just do. I mean, we're human beings and we're here on our own past learning. So what I found though is that hunger for status, power, or money really was something that could never be filled. It could never be filled enough. And so I had to break from that and really start shifting that. It's not that I don't still want to be successful and I still want to make money. I do. But my purpose of why I do it now, of being a purpose-driven consultant or a purpose-driven coach or only working with companies that have purpose-driven higher mission type goals, aspirations, and products or services, now has been, it's a combined, how can I serve? How can I be of value? And from that, then monetary money can still come from it, but I don't exchange one for the other.
Right. Well, yeah, you mentioned Warren Buffett. From all accounts that I have heard and read, he's actually a pretty unassuming guy. What was he like?
You know, he is very unassuming. I remember when I first was flying back to meet him, he had bought our company. I was on the executive team at the time, and I heard, okay, Steve, we have a small group of our team going back to meet Warren Buffett in Omaha. I'm like, oh my God. And I remember flying on the plane going, I was flying back, and I also at the time was so excited and so like, oh my God. I mean, it was just
going to meet
awe.
Warren Buffett. I'm going to meet Warren Buffett.
And at the same time, I had this also self-doubt of like worthiness. I was like, oh my God, you know, is he going to know that I didn't graduate high school? I mean, I had like this insecurity.
What if he doesn't like me?
Yeah. I mean, it was amazing. I was like, okay, my self-sabotaging talk here, I'm going to meet this one of the most successful men in the world. And I've got this honor. And how am I going into self-doubt talk? And luckily that didn't last very long. But when I got into the room with him, there was probably about 30 of us in a pre-cocktail party before we went to dinner with him. And I was, observing people walking up and speaking to him. And I was observing how he was shaking people's hands. And I was looking across the room and I was thinking, God, he looks just like kind of like somebody's grandpa in a bad J.C. Penney suit with hair growing out of his ears and his glasses are all fogged up and basically kind of thing. And I'm like, wow, that's still Warren Buffett. But I was listening to the conversations as I was trying to stay around the room waiting for my turn. And he was so charming and so down to earth and talking with people on their level about what they wanted to talk about. And he was so, when I got up to speak to him, I had one of my first jobs was at Dairy Queen, and he owned a big part of Dairy Queen and stocks and things. And so we had a chuckle about that. But we went on to talk about the real estate market and stocks and Social Security and Cherry Cokes. And over the years, I got to observe him in small dinners, in meetings that he spoke at, in his authority of running the company, decisions made from Berkshire Hathaway that trickled down to his companies, and also observing him like in front of 20,000 people at the Berkshire Hathaway shareholder conference with Charlie Munger. And I must say that he is so aware of who he is and who he is not in his life. And he's very comfortable in the skin of not trying to be something he's not, and trying to put on airs. You know, as people know, many people know, he's lived in the same house for many, many years. He's not all into shiny things and status stuff, and he's given much of his wealth away and plans on giving away more. So I found it to be an honor to meet and work for him. I was in awe by his humbleness. I was in awe by his brilliance, of his gifted mind that he was gifted with from a higher power, and he's used it to his greatest talent. And he really is passionate about what he does. I mean, you know, some people are passionate about art or music or sports. He is so passionate about numbers and business and forecasting things. It really is what lights him up. So it was very cool to be observing that and being part of that DNA for a period of my career.
Right. You know, and it seems like he embodies one of the things that you mentioned, and that's that servant leader, you know, knowing how to bring out the best in people by helping them.
Yes.
You know, and I think that's what, you know, we're getting there. More and more businesses are figuring out that, you know, if you treat the people well that work for you, even if they leave you, that's okay.
Yes.
You know, and it didn't used to be like that. I mean, you know, if you would have suggested, you know, hey, I'm going to take a college class, would you like reimburse me for that?
Right.
You know, and
fear
now,
and threaten, like, heck no. Yeah.
Because they would think, well, you know, you're gonna figure out you shouldn't be here.
Yes.
You know? And if that was the case, well, then you didn't want him there anyway. You know, but yeah, it really has been more. Now I say that not having been in corporate America for 20 years, you know, I've had my own business, but I've worked with lots of companies.
Yes.
And they really have figured out, what can we do to make things the best for our employees?
Yes.
You know, and that really is part of being a servant leader.
Absolutely. And Warren definitely does that. I mean, even though it doesn't always trickle down to the complete ground level of all the companies he owns, it is attempted to be, and at least it's a model that they hold to about him. I mean, that's why he buys companies and typically doesn't change their names. He buys companies and has the CEOs or owners stay on for a minimum of 5 years because he wants the leadership. He wants the culture.
He buys
like,
a good company.
He buys a good company.
Why mess it up?
Exactly. He's like, hey, I have the money. I can help you sustain up and down markets. Why mess it up? Let's just do better and more of what you're doing. And possibly with more money and more support system, does it allow you to do more good in the world? Can you better your product? Can you make better employee relations? Can you, make your products more sustainable? So that is his mission and his vision. And like I said, it doesn't always trickle down, but his altruistic
when you have hundreds of thousands of employees.
Right. Exactly. But at least that's his intended culture. And then it has to be led. But I think in this day and age, you're right. The millennials, the XY generation, they are no longer impressed with just because you have a title or just because you say they're your boss or just because you are an authority, that is going to be taken at fact. I mean, when I grew up, if you were a teacher or a policeman or my boss or whomever, I was brought up that I better listen to you and that you possibly were right.
And sir.
Sir, absolutely. Yes. Thank you, ma'am, sir, all that. And there's nothing wrong with that by any means. I think that we could probably use a little bit more of that kindness and respect.
Yeah.
However, questioning authority in the proper way and questioning your own, where are you most happy and where can you serve, and allowing companies to have you question that and search about better education, learning more skills, learning communication skills, giving you time off to do community service, giving you time off to have longer time with your baby that you have, or, if you're a husband, having time off to also spend with your baby, even though you didn't have, those kinds of things that have come in the world of the workplace are reasons why people want to stay at companies longer now, not just because of the paycheck, not just because of the title. And you deal with a lot of entrepreneurs over the years, and you're an entrepreneur, and entrepreneurship is a great path of where brilliance and creativity and intelligence come from people sometimes not liking how status quo has been in something, either being, not enjoying corporate America or feeling they could do it better or feeling they had an idea that might serve the world better. So an entrepreneurship path is something that also I have embraced, and I love being around entrepreneurs because it is sometimes a little less corporate-y, even though corporate is really just a structure. We say the word corporate, but corporate is really just a structure of having a structure in which a company can function and run legally. It doesn't mean that if you own a large company, you have to, quote, in parentheses, be corporate.
Right.
But it does happen when you get larger and larger that you have to have more processes and systems.
More rules.
Right.
Right.
And we all need rules to a degree, but as they say, rules are meant to be broken at times.
Right. Or changed.
Or changed, yeah.
It was funny. The radio program I listened to every morning here, they were talking about unwritten rules. And he was so funny because he said, it's a rule or it's not a rule. There's no unwritten rules. And he was right. I mean, it really is true. And he said, if you want something, then you should make it a rule. It shouldn't be an unwritten rule. And I found that humorous because it really was like, oh yeah, he's right. It is or it isn't.
Yeah.
And his philosophy, he said, so if a police officer pulls you over and said, well, it's an unwritten rule that you shouldn't do X, you're going to go, no, you can't give me that ticket.
Right. Right. Well, and that also applies for our own boundaries in our own life, having rules for what we tolerate, what we don't tolerate.
Right.
And sometimes we're like, we don't always tell people what are not, it's an unwritten rule for ourselves, but in our mind, our soul, we're like, oh, I would never tolerate that. Or it's a rule for me that I would not allow my boss, my job, my parent, my spouse to do this or to do that or to break this rule. But if you're not communicating that and you're not setting a clear definition of what your relationships are in business or personal life, those are also rules that we all live by.
Right.
I mean, everyone has their own code of ethics. Everyone has their own rules in which they say, that's kind of my own rule book or that's my moral compass. And so I think that the more we can make that clear and the more people understand that and the more we can stand up for what we believe out of our rules. And then also what happens if rules are broken? What are the consequences? So then also articulating what are the consequences of rules being broken, quote, written or unwritten. It's if they're unwritten, that just means that they're not clear enough. Right. They're not spoken about enough. And I think what's happening they're arbitrary, exactly. And I think what's happening in our world right now with politics and COVID and all the stuff that's happening, there is so many rules that existed that are being challenged.
Right.
And there's new rules that are being made because they weren't necessary before, i.e. wearing a mask or i.e. social distancing. Those are new, quote, rules that some people feel should be followed or shouldn't be. So as society evolves or as we evolve as human and spiritual beings, we also have rules that are, quote, written or unwritten. And how do we make those clear to those around us so you can have a better life environment and make it so that people don't have to guess what your rules are? Or what your,
Because if they guess wrong, you can't hold it against them, or you shouldn't.
Right.
That's right. But I tell my husband, I can't read your mind.
My wife and I have that same conversation. We've been married 30 years, and my wife.
We're 27. So
are you? Hey there. So we're right on that path. Yep. Congratulations.
Oh yeah. And so we can kind of read their minds, right?
But as they evolve and as they grow, sometimes I was off target. Like I thought I could read their mind, I couldn't. But my wife will have this thing where sometimes she'll have a dream, and she'll have had this dream that I did something in this dream. And I had this dream.
And then she
wakes up and she's mad at me. I'm like, I didn't even do that. It was like, but she wakes up with this feeling of like, it's so funny. Or we as people, sometimes we make up stories in our head. If someone didn't call us back or someone didn't invite us to a party or someone looked at us funny, we make up these stories in our head without having all the facts and the rules or about what was real. And it really then changes the behavior. So it's just funny how communication can really help clarify rules or relationships or whatever it might be.
And you mentioned COVID, where we are recording this right in the middle, the end, the wherever we are. And, right. They told us 2 weeks and I thought, it's going to be a month. And, that was seven months ago.
Right.
But the rules are definitely changing, and especially for businesses.
Yes.
And from what I've seen, I think things, I feel horrible and awful for the businesses that aren't going to make it. That's just tragedy for the business, for the employees, things like that. But I think the businesses that are surviving are finding it by one of the things is working differently with their employees. This whole thing of you were in an office one day and now you're home, and you're home for a really long time and you've got your 2.5 kids there and, all of those various things. So they're finding that, telling people, well, you have to work from 8 until 5 might not work anymore. In fact, it's probably not going to work anymore, especially if they have kids at home, if they have, all sorts of things. And so they're finding that they're having to change and make new rules. And of course, the biggest rule is, are you getting your work done?
Right.
Okay, fine.
Right. So true. Well, and I mean, I don't know who made up that quote originally, but the one, necessity is the mother of invention. It's been around for hundreds of, not thousands of years, but I think about that in COVID. There are so many things that are being done, like you said, right now, whether it's in the healthcare space, education, entrepreneurship, art
I
classes.
have designer masks. Who would have thought 7 months ago?
I know. There's a whole market that exists that there. I mean, these plastic things that are up in front of the cash registers, or the footprints on the floors at the grocery stores.
Yeah.
That,
I'm going the wrong way.
Those are products and services that didn't really exist before. And there have been businesses that have absolutely been dismantled and crushed. And I mean, I have some friends that own catering businesses, and friends that were in the wedding business, and friends that own concert venues. And so some of them have just been crushed. And they are pivoting, and they are shifting, and they are licking their wounds, and then looking at either new business models, or they're getting out of that business model altogether. And there are businesses that are actually thriving. I mean, there are businesses that have really taken going, oh my God, look at Zoom. I mean, we're, I know. Oh my God, their stock is like 50 times higher than it was.
Smartest thing they could do was to tell schools they got it for free.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, that's a business model that existed, but something like a tragedy that we have now has elevated that to more of service to the world, or online education programs, or like you said, mask, or realizing, hey, this does save me time to have a meeting with 10 people in a Zoom call versus having everyone drive to be there to then drive back. I've got right now 4 virtual assistants, and when I do my evening call with them, I have one in Costa Rica, one in Japan, one in India, one in the United States, and one in the Philippines. And we use Zoom to communicate and streamline processes and systems, and use talent in ways that I'm maximizing that. So I think that you're right. It is challenging all of us to go, when we said, I can never do that. And now people are doing it. Right. And it's one of those never say never things. I mean, and I think that the Mother Nature, God, universe has said, hey, you didn't think you could slow down? You didn't think you could? Guess what? Hey, I'm going to give you a brick upside the head the moment. You've had those. I know you've had those with your health. I've had those with my health. I've had those in as much as we were talking about corporate America and Warren Buffett. It was a great honor. After 15 years at corporate America and the meltdown in 2008, which was kind of like a real estate COVID. It was like mortgage and real estate COVID. It just demolished the real estate industry. I had to close half of our company, had to fire people left and right, closed 45 of our 110 real estate offices. And then a week before Christmas, I got fired and pushed out.
Before Christmas?
Like a week. And it wasn't by Warren Buffett directly. It was the corporate ladder that went down. But I was the high guy at the totem pole. I had was making still a lot of money. They put the guy in under me that made half that I did, that wasn't as vocal about pushing back and all that stuff. And it was time. But that brick upside the head the moment was my necessity as a mother of invention. That was my own personal COVID of like tragedy and change and identity and money, and have to go reinvent and I found a way to find a path and go create. And that happens to people every day of their own lives, with health or marriage or divorce or cancer or alcoholism, which I struggled with, many, many years ago. And lucky to say I have been able to overcome that. Yeah, thank you. But those are all our own quote COVID moments. We all have our own private internal COVID moments that devastate us, that change our rules, that move the cheese in a big, big way. This one just happens to be global, and it shows us how connected we all really are. Like it or not, we are connected through technology, through viruses, through health, and through common things that everybody wants. People want their families to be healthy. People want to feel safe. People want to have a right to speak up. People, all of those things. I don't care if you're in Japan or Russia or China or, San Diego or Atlanta. Those are common things that all of us as human beings and spiritual beings want. And so I'm hoping that even though there's all this disrest and all this upheaval in the country, that it will start swinging into even more awareness besides just divisiveness. I know that's a little Pollyanna, but we have to focus on the good and in addition to take the challenges we have at hand in the world.
And it's funny that you say Pollyanna, because I've been accused of that too. And maybe it's just that we like to think the best in people. Now there are definitely people that I have cut out of my life. Starting 5 years ago, it was just, I needed to focus on healing.
Yes.
And having, people in my life that were, nasty, negative, whatever, that just wasn't going to help me heal. Now, can you get rid of all of them? Sometimes you can't. But you can limit your exposure, things like that. But the bad part is that it quite often takes a tragedy, whether personal, global, whatever, for us to really start thinking, okay, what is going on here? What is happening? And to really rethink things. I think, I was talking with somebody earlier today, and I said, I think the whole, key to surviving this pandemic is patience. And just remembering that everybody's going through this, where there is no one who's not touched by it. And when we have our personal things, nobody knows. But yeah, there's all these things that kind of go into it. And we have to remember that people are going through that. I was telling somebody else, there's the whole big mask debate. And, I'm because of my immune system, I wear a mask.
Yeah.
If you don't want to wear a mask, fine. I just get a little bit further away from you. You know what? That's that, but I was walking through a parking lot and this was, a while ago, and this was actually when things were still really unsettled. And I had my mask on, and this man, you must be a Democrat. And I stopped, and my husband's like, and I turned around, and I do have my mother's finger on occasion. and I looked at him and I said, no, sir, I'm a cancer patient.
Good for you. Wow.
And he
That's
stopped and he literally kind of moved back, and he said, I'm sorry. And I said, think of that the next time you're going to be nasty to somebody.
Wow. That's
powerful.
Now,
But the bad part was that I had to say that.
Yes.
Right. But maybe it did make him think twice about,
I'm sure it did. That would make me think twice. I'm like, wow.
The few times where I've actually told somebody, hey, would you mind pulling your mask up? It's been because I've recently had a treatment or something like that, and sure. can't move away from them. But yeah, I'm like, okay, if you choose not to wear a mask, that is your choice. But all of these things, they really do make us look deeper inside ourselves is maybe the best way to put that. And that really is how you work with people, is to get them to find that and develop it and nurture it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it goes back to what you were talking about earlier about rules. I mean, when you were talking about having people no longer in your life, obviously they broke certain rules that were boundaries for you that you said no longer. This is that's a personal rule to you. If they offended you too many times, if they offended others, if they didn't bring joy into your life, whatever it might be, you might, okay, that rule is now broken enough. Yeah. I'm gonna shorten my circle or make my circle smaller. And in the rules of the mask stuff, it is funny how that's become a political what side you're on. I mean, I think about, if you look back in the days when you could walk into restaurants without shoes, walk into restaurants without shirts, you didn't have to wear a seatbelt, you could smoke in restaurants, you could smoke on planes. All of those were precautionary things to help society as a whole. It wasn't just about infringing on your right. Like, yeah, I know you'd rather go barefoot in a restaurant, but we have rules. You can't do that. Or we know you'd like to smoke your cigarette on the plane right now, but no, you can't do that anymore.
And we survived it.
And we survived it, and it's like, as a society, if having a mask on has become such a political statement when it really started out as a health issue about being respectful of those around you. Like, if you were before COVID going to sneeze and you're at a meeting, you wouldn't just sneeze all over the table, but you'd put your hand over your mouth, and that's kind of social respected, unspoken or spoken rule. So if we now said, hey, what does a mask hurt? Like my point is, what does it hurt if it helps others around you, and it helps show that you're part of the cause of let's all get beyond this. So it is one of those things, whether it's a company, whether it's society, whether it's your family, that if something is important enough, that's where it's being of service to others. And when we were talking about earlier, how can I be of service to others versus being in my ego? So when you're in the mass situation, when you're in making a decision for an employee, should I have a program? Should I not have a program? Again, that simple phrase, is that ego or is that Iggy? And if people could just pause and ask yourself that question, is that edging good out? Is that edging God out? Or is that inviting good in? Or is that inviting God in? And if the answer is yes, more towards the Iggy, why not lean towards that in all the decisions we're making? And it's a very simple thing to look at. Like you said, we need more of that right now. We don't need less. And it will change. I know many people that have been affected by COVID. Some have passed, some have been sick, some companies have been devastated, many have recovered, but it is real. So we have to realize it's real. I get people think it's no further than the flu, but at least we have flu shots. We don't have a COVID shot yet. You know what I'm saying? So even though, and the statistics are different, and they are higher, but it is what it is, so to speak. So let's deal with what's in front of us, and how can we better and serve everybody together? Right.
And we saw that happen when September 11th happened.
Absolutely.
Where everybody came together, and at that point I was still working in corporate America. And one of the things that I got tasked with was buying an American flag that we could hang in the lobby. Now, this was not your 5x3 flag that you could get at Lowe's. This was, like a 60-foot flag. I mean, this is a massive flag. And I couldn't buy one because they were immediately bought out.
All gone.
And the company that I ended up buying it from, they ran their machines full time and all sorts of stuff. And it really did only take a couple of days, but we had that whole, we're in this together type of thing. And then it faded. And we got back to, okay, what's in it for me? And all of those things, and the bad part is that, or the good part, I mean, it is the way it is. That's what happens. We have something that happens, we learn from it, and then we kind of slide back, and then something else happens, and all of these things, it just, you hope that more of the good sticks with us each time.
Yeah, agreed. Well, and I think that partially comes between that mindset of us and them, whatever us or them might be. And I think about September 11th, and it's kind of like, I have 4 brothers, so I came from a family of 5 boys, and I could fight with left and right, but if somebody else picked on my brother, believe me, I was going to stand up and say, you are not going to pick on my brother. And I think as America, and then as the world, when we got picked on and then devastated, and people saw how horrendous that was, not only the US pulled together, like, you're not going to do that to us, others rallied against that as well, at the majority of the world. And I think right now, even though, yes, it looks like this originated from China, then it's an us and them. This very well could have originated from the US. This very well, it's, I mean, not I'm not saying it did now, but in the future, because this will not be the last time there's some now virus that has affected everybody, whether it's intended or warfare
that come around. I mean, I remember Ebola and SARS and all of those various things.
There's going to be more in our lifetime and in our grandkids' lifetime, and it will be so. Where will it come from? Finland? Will it come from Hawaii? Will it come? So if we're always blaming where it came from, and it creates this us or them, then it creates the divisiveness versus going, okay, we're all in this together. Just like this was September 11th, just for New York and the United States, even though it happened in China, they're dying all over the world and also dying in China. So, it's like, it shouldn't, so I'm thinking if we can get to the mindset again, just lives, our families and our businesses, again, trying to get past the us and them and getting into the we. If we continue to get into the we as a global society, which is really where power and Iggy's all out. I'm not here to profess anybody's religion, anybody's practice, anything like that. But what I know, all common religions, all common spirituals, all, wanting to do good and find joy and peace in the world, ultimately, thing, happiness, we want love. We want the golden rule. We want to feel like we have meaning. We want to feel like there's a safe place for our kids to grow up and prosper and grow. I don't care what your culture, your race, all religions, all people typically want those common things.
Right.
So if we realize that's the we, if that's the we, what is the common thing we can do in our businesses and our cultures and our products and our services that help fuel more of that, not less of that? And how can we make more we's versus us and thems?
Right. I back in March started an online networking group, and that was more just because we were all feeling very isolated, and this way we could at least see each other, and it evolved into having an educational component. And just yesterday, today's Wednesday, right? So just yesterday we talked about the cowboy way and the code of the West. And and I love talking about that because it was very much the same thing. And one of the things that we brought up was the fact that a lot of cowboys are not go to church type of people. Now there's a variety of reasons for that, not the least of which is they don't have time. They have to be doing stuff on the ranch or the farm or whatever. And but they were, I grew up in northern Colorado, ranchers all around us, and all of these things, and to me they were all deeply spiritual.
Yes.
There was and it was that tie to the land.
That's right.
They might have never touched a Bible in their life, but they might have been the most spiritual people that I knew.
Absolutely. Well, and I agree with you. I mean, anytime you have something, the only thing that I define spirituality is, and that I define God as, my definition of God is that God is the sum of all that is. So that's my definition. So if God is the sum of all that is, because everything is made up of energy, then I have no preconceived notion about what he or she looks like. And it's not in a, it's not in a set figure. It is just this universal higher consciousness of energy, and it's the sum of all that is. I know that that's not me. I know that I'm part of that. I know that I'm a piece of that energy. It's like if you take a glass and you dip it into the ocean and you hold it up. I talked about that in my book. And I got that from other teachers that I had. But if you're in the ocean and you have a glass of water and you pull the glass up and you go, oh, there's ocean in my glass. Is that still ocean water? Or is that now just water? And if you turn it upside down and you turn it back into ocean, it goes back to source. It changes form, but it's still part of the same. So whether you're Catholic or Muslim or Hindu or have no religious spirituality definition, but you are a higher, you believe in you believe Mother Nature exists. You believe in love. You believe in fate. You believe in calves being birthed by its mother. You believe in seasonal, farming, and that has a rhythm to it. That is all spirituality to me. Your prayer might be playing a guitar. Your prayer might be sitting quietly and listening to the birds on your back porch. Your meditation might be listening to classical music for 5 minutes in your car in your garage. I mean, so, to me, I'm not here to define that for anybody. I just am here to encourage people to find more of that for themselves, like dig deeper on that piece. And how can you then have that fuel even further? It's like we were talking about the rules, defined or undefined. How can you define your own spirituality? And then say, how can I turn that into a practice for myself that it nourishes my soul more? And if it nourishes my soul more, can I share that with others in my own unique way? And that's all. That's the simplicity of what I'm doing. And I think our businesses, whether you're a president, a CEO, a teacher, an entrepreneur, a homemaker, a student, all those things are just examples and excuses that in the world, like Shakespeare said, all the world's a stage, and we're all just actors on it. What we do is just an excuse to show up and be better human beings and better spiritual beings. Use our craft to share that higher Iggy energy. So that's how I look at the importance of all of us taking awareness of that.
Right. So what is spiritual intelligence? Because you talk about that in your book.
Yeah, well, I've done a lot of, over the years being in corporate, we had all these personality surveys where we would, have people do their surveys and whether they were controller or amiable or analytical. And then we started getting into emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence was defined about your EQ and your IQ. And now the buzzword, and it's part of much of what we're doing, and it's even part of some of the stuff that's probably here on Zoom, artificial intelligence. Or if you're on Amazon ordering a product and the chat box pops up and there's
or it says, if
questions.
you like this, you'll like this.
Exactly. That's all artificial intelligence. So for me, spiritual intelligence is, again, if my definition of God is the sum of all that is, all of that stuff that we just talked about, intellect, emotional intelligence, artificial intelligence, technology, Google, all the stuff you can search on Google, that's also part of a higher intelligence that allowed us to develop and create that. So spiritual intelligence is tapping into understanding what is your operating system. So like some people use Apple, some people use a different type of phone, or I happen to be on a desktop versus a Mac on my desktop. That's an operating system that operates in a certain way.
Right.
So spiritual intelligence is taking what your belief is of spirituality and believing that that's something higher than yourself, and that that operating system becomes part of your daily DNA. And it's your constantly, it's your running operating system of your life, your ego, and your spirit. So spiritual intelligence is realizing that there is something higher than myself, and in your business plans, your decisions, your thinking, that you're pausing to allow room for that. That you're pausing to allow and invite that in. So when you are looking for answers, when you are making decisions, that you say, what is my spiritual intelligence around this? And that's usually about getting quiet for a few minutes and tapping into that inner voice that you have. So that's spiritual intelligence, is just really your operating system of something higher than yourself, and allowing that to run your life more than you run your life yourself.
Right. You know, and I love that, you know, stopping and pausing. You know, and you talk in your book about meditating and prayer and things like that. And I think that's one of the things that we get caught up in is we're going. And even if we're sitting, we've got our phone in front of us and we're looking at Facebook and we're doing this and this and this and this and this. And we never just pause.
Yes.
Several years ago, my husband built this pergola type of thing outside, and it's, you know, I've recently kind of rediscovered it, and, you know, furnished it, and, you know, put all these, you know, all these various things, and I love to go out there. Now usually I take a book, but to me that's a pause, is to take and sit. And, you know, when I really am doing, I'll put the book down, and I'll, you know, how many different birds can I pick out? We live behind, you know, there's a big wooded area behind us, you know, all of these various things. And maybe that comes partially from growing up in Colorado, that, you know, there's a little bit more nature that's in me. And there are times where I need nature. When I was so sick, I spent 7 weeks in the hospital.
Wow.
And, you know, and at one point they actually transferred me to a different facility. And, you know, I'm on the little gurney and they're taking me out, and I don't know, I don't quite remember what I did, but I remember he said, do you want us to just stay here so you can soak up the sun? And I mean, it was like 2 minutes at the most. I mean, you know, but it was just like, oh my God, there's fresh air.
Yeah, that's right. I remember that. Yeah. I remember that, Willie, when you said that, I just had a flashback. My wife, back when I had one of those another spiritual awakening, this was about 7 or 8 years ago or more, she had an unexpected surgery that went very badly, and ended up in almost bleeding to death, and ended up in intensive care, almost died, was in a coma for almost a week, and was in the hospital for weeks. And I remember wheeling her out of the hospital, like you just said, no makeup on, looked like she had been in a coma for weeks and weeks. And she got that sun, and she was sitting there, and she just smiled and put her face up to the sun and just paused and just wanted to sit there. And I remember, as you just said that, I remember that experience. So thank you for reminding me of that. But yes, that silent moment, you know, we are always on this hustle, bustle, stuff, characters flowing around our screen, on our computer screen, pop-ups, all of that. So I have a daily practice that I have to discipline myself to, obviously, you know, we all know when we're supposed to eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner, we brush our teeth, we know when we have to go to the bathroom, we know when we go to sleep. And if I didn't plug in a daily schedule and a daily ritual of daily meditation and prayer and pausing and stopping, I would let other days go by. So I think I talked about in that, my book, The 4 B's, where I have a daily scorecard of body, being, bonds, and business. And my being category is daily meditation a few times throughout the day, that I pause, and no music, no anything. It's me sitting and just listening. And it's, and I think about the cowboy out on the riding the horse. I mean, they clearly have their pauses of connections with nature, and they're in that pause where they're not listening to stuff. And even for them, even pausing there and then stopping in nature and even listening deeper than just the birds or the calves is the place you can even go deeper. So for me, when you talked about earlier before we jumped on the call about part of your cancer stuff is people say, I'll pray for you. I'm thinking of you.
Right.
I'm with you. My heart's with you. And anytime there's tragedy, that's a common thing that we say, and people mean it. And for me, that's so necessary. But prayer is usually giving or asking for things or offering things to others.
Right.
Meditation is stopping and just stopping all the noise and then listening to your higher spiritual intelligence. And it's stopping those voices that continually run in our head ongoing. And it's even with the silence, finding ways to still that voice and find the silence beyond that. And it's magical when it connects and happens. And that's where your deepest core of spiritual intelligence really is, and tapping into that. So on a daily basis, I absolutely have to stop and pause and do that. And I highly encourage it to anybody who's looking to de-stress their life, to find more peace and tranquility, to get through difficult times and make decisions that are better for yourself or your life or your business. Just some little few minutes of meditation each day throughout the day can dramatically shift your consciousness of that you're not alone. And you were talking about that, about some of the stuff you had. You're not alone. And even when there's no one around you, when you tap into spiritual intelligence, you are never, ever, ever alone.
Right. And you feel kind of that healing power.
Yes.
I had shared that, before I go in for my variety of ongoing procedures, I'm not alone. There are people who are with me, and you're always anxious when you go in for things like that. I mean, there's just even if it's a routine procedure, you're still, there's all sorts of things that you're thinking about. And I have found that when I stop and just think, okay, first of all, I can't let all of those people down, but it is, I can't let them down because they are supporting me. And, and it's been interesting because some of them are people that I never, ever thought even knew I existed. And some of them don't. I mean, I've been on prayer groups and prayer chains in churches where I've never been, and all these various things. And I just think that's the coolest thing in the world.
Yeah, that is.
But then there have also been people that dropped off, for whatever reason. And I don't hold any ill will toward them, and it was just the time that they, went on their merry little way, and that's perfectly fine. But yeah, it is weird how, to bring this full circle, it unfortunately takes something like being sick, having a pandemic, losing your business, all of these various things for us to stop and think, okay, now what? And unfortunately for some, they don't survive it, but there are so many who come out of it much better.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and when all those people are saying they pray for you, or if we think about, when we say the Pledge of Allegiance, God bless America, or we're saying you're in my prayers and thoughts,
right.
Those people are tapping into a higher energy, which again is the sum of all that is. And that's just channeling it for you. So whether they were partially on your path or that served you at the time, and that energy continues to move onward and continues to surround you. I mean, you're even talking about it now. So that energy lives, and that those prayers, those thoughts, that tangibleness of giving your heart or your blessings to someone else does help them continue to go on, and that is part of also like servant leadership in a way, because when there's other people that care and are counting about wanting to hear your story, even though you're there trying to survive, and in some cases life or death, you're also thinking about serving others by honoring them and by letting them know that you're getting through this, or letting them know bad day. So it's interesting when people care about you, it pulls us also out of ourselves, and also is a form of servant leadership, even though it's them trying to serve us. It's funny how that works, and it's reciprocal.
Right. And we have to be open to accepting it. I think that's the other thing. And, and unfortunately, oh my gosh, we are almost at the top of the hour. We just scratched the surface on this. One of the things that you talk about in the book is being receptive to that, to tell your employees, to tell, customers, whoever it is, I need help. Or maybe not even help, but hey, here's what's going on, and allowing people to do that, because it's better for everyone in the long run when you do that. Yeah. And that's the hard part, because
it's very hard. We all want to look strong. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We're the boss. And I remember going through corporate America, I know we're almost out of here. And when I had to do speeches in front of the group, I was the suit and tie guy. I carried the message. And when I first had my first bout with almost dying back for a tragic thing I had years ago, and I was vulnerable on stage and talked about how that shifted and changed me, I started shifting all my communications moving forward about being vulnerable, about being transparent, about being real, and not being the suit and tie guy. And it shifted dramatically how people responded and reacted to me, that I didn't need help, that I didn't have all the answers. I mean, who was I to fuel anybody that I thought I did in the first place? So you're right. Being receptive to asking for help, being vulnerable, showing your possible inadequacies or your frailties along with your strengths makes us a full human spiritual being. And I think the more we do that, the more people are willing to dress up, show up, and be more of themselves with you.
Right. Which ultimately is, going to benefit your business, your life, whatever.
Absolutely.
Well, see, this is why I set a timer, because, we could be going on for this forever, because it's just so fascinating. And I love talking about it. It's so cool. So it just means we have to chat again. But,
Yes,
and I forgot to say, do you have a copy of your book that you can show us? Because I just have the digital version.
Oh, yeah. Right here.
You have to be Vanna. Be Vanna.
This is the Iggy Principles.
The Iggy Principles. And yes, it is Iggy, not IGI.
And what's interesting about the book is that at the end of it's a shorter book and the chapters are smaller, but at the end of every chapter, there's a QR code that you take a picture of, and it takes you to a 2 to 3 minute video. Or if you're in your Kindle, you just click on the link. And so it's an interactive book. It's got reading, video, and then there's also a site that it takes you to that has social media interactive quotes and pre-written swipes. So it's a multimedia book.
We know Mitchell Levy.
Yeah. Okay, Mitchell. And Mitchell, the publisher.
I'm an AHA person.
Oh, perfect. Great.
And so what we're talking about, folks, is you have to read the book to see what we're talking about. But it's a great book. I loved reading it. So how do people find and connect with you, Steve?
Thank you. Probably the easiest way, again, as you mentioned, my name's Steve Rodgers, and a lot of people say, "Oh, is that like Captain America?" I'm like, "Oh,
actually, Captain America."
Yeah. Well, when my early days, I used to call me Mr. Rogers. Where's your neighborhood? Where's your sweater? So I got all that. And it wasn't bad. But when the Marvels then made Captain America popular again, and they go, "Hey," I'd start checking into hotels, and they're like, "You mean like Captain America?" And I would laugh. I go, "Oh, I guess so, yeah." Anyway, but I'm Rodgers with a D, RODGERS. So it's steverogers.net. And on there, you'll see links to my book, videos, blogs, social media connections, all that. So steverogers.net is probably the best place to start. And then my books are on Amazon as well. And so that's the best way to connect with me.
Perfect. I love it. Well, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to leave us with?
Well, I think one of the thoughts is, as you said earlier, about being patient is absolutely key. And then I would also end on being grateful. Finding things, and you and I had this conversation before the call, and you brought this to light again, and all the challenges you had with some of your health stuff, that your humor and your ability to find gratefulness, even when you're going in for treatments or processes or making the doctors, that you have found ways to be grateful, even in the midst of hardship. So I would encourage myself to be reminded of that. And thank you for reminding myself that earlier. And I talk about that in the book as well. But for all the listeners, find out what you can be grateful for today. Where is the smallest or the biggest rock item that you can find gratitude, and then let that gratitude magnify and tell somebody about it. Tell somebody about what you're grateful for within them or around them. So I would say I would end on gratitude.
I love it. Well, I am so grateful that I had this opportunity to talk with you. Can't wait to do it again, and we definitely will.
Absolutely.
Until then, though, I'm Deb Creer. I've been having a wonderful, delightful conversation with Steve Rodgers. And until next time, everyone have a great day.
Thanks, Deb. Thanks, everybody.
Tune in for our next program for even more trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. The Business Power Hour, hosted by Deb Creer, is proud to be part of the C-Suite Network.